For that presentation. And now we're just going to keep on rolling with Maureen. Maureen is going to share a new presentation on collaborative detection prevails in a time of crisis. And remember, folks, keep those questions coming into the Q&A box and we'll get to those at the end.
You have to, so is this look okay?
Now it does, thanks.
Okay. So the title of my talk is Collaborative Detection Prevails in a Time of Crisis. So Wisconsin's Aquatic Invasive Species Monitoring Program, we work with the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership, which is comprised of the DNR, UW Extension, Madison, River Alliance of Wisconsin, Water Action Volunteers, and Citizen Lake Monitoring Network. So in 2020, you know, we're all dealing with this global pandemic with coronavirus. So we had to spend time figuring out what are we going to do in 2020. We have a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of things we can do to help prevent the spread of this virus. So we followed the Badger Bounce Back Plan to develop our strategy with how we're going to conduct AIS monitoring in the state. A lot of that involves what most of you all did. We teleworked when possible, so we've all been working from home for a year, which is why this conference is virtual. When we were indoors, we wear face masks, stay 6 feet apart. Same with outdoors. We're 6 feet apart with face masks and less than 10 people. And then we also had to do field work solo in cars. We went out by ourselves in field work or just met others, but we had to have fewer people. So we started out, we're all working from home in different conditions. Some folks got to telework with their webinars. A lot of us had kids working from home, and that's been a bit to juggle. But everybody got used to wearing face masks no matter what they did. Our first biggest change was how we hosted trainings. Usually we do one train the trainer training where we meet just a smaller group of us, less than a dozen, in a central location in the state, train everybody, then everyone works with their partners to host trainings in the different districts in the state for the different programs, but none of those trainings could occur this spring because we weren't in person at all. So we did recorded webinars. We hosted an ID webinar review and then verification where we taught people how to take photos to send in for verification when they found species. And we had pretty good attendance, 120 and over 60 people attended. And then those webinars were recorded and the links have several hits on their respective websites. Then we conducted the monitoring. Here's just pictures of us when we met in groups. We had less than 10 people. We stayed apart, wore the face masks. We got used to being alone in the field, just monitoring access points and then staying far apart when we could. We went out in the boats hardly ever. We went out in kayaks where you could be with a buddy but stay far enough apart. It was really remarkable how much work we actually pulled off in the field this summer and were able to do it safely. We also developed new tools. We did eDNA sampling, environmental DNA sampling this summer on 3 different species. We're working on optimization pilot projects with the State Lab of Hygiene because we knew we're pretty good at eDNA, but we know it could be better. We wanted to test the way we're collecting these eDNA samples in the field and then how the lab was running the analysis. So this summer, we actually were able to do these optimization projects, the data collection, the State Lab's still doing the analysis for 3 different species, which are New Zealand mud snails, Asian clam, the Corbicula fluminii, and then zebra mussels, where we collected the water in the field, sent it to the lab. We actually worked with partners. Typically, we do these types of studies with just the department, but we had one department employee who left the DNR for a different job. So I reached out to the counties to help out with this. Washburn County and Burnett County helped fill the role of a DNR person. We had to mail them the peristaltic pump to sample eDNA in some of the lakes in Northwest Wisconsin and host webinars and try to show videos. This is how it works. This is how you do it. And they did it. They pulled it off. They were able to collect all of the samples that we asked them to collect. And we don't have the results yet, but we should in the next month or so, which was impressive, I thought. We also conducted aerial surveillance. The DNR has an aeronautics team that are all certified pilots that fly these drones. We tested drones out this summer on 2 different species. One was purple loosestrife in northwest Wisconsin near Lake Superior. The other was to look for freshwater pennywort in Horicon Marsh, because these are places that you really can't even put a canoe in. So we thought we'd just test out the drones to see, well, can they see these species? How high do we fly the drones at? And then we also, of course, worked with the conservation canines, like you guys just heard about. So what did we find this summer? The slide's a lot to look at, and I'll walk you through it. So we monitored over 1,000 different fieldwork events, which is really impressive during a pandemic. The column on the far left is for the project. There's a bunch of projects for citizens, followed by partners, and then DNR at the bottom. The different citizen projects are Citizen Lake Monitoring Network, the Water Action Volunteers, Project Riverine Early Detection, AI Snapshot Day, and just incidental reports from citizens. And then, like I said, partners and DNR. The events column is the number of fieldwork events, the number of times somebody went out for that program this summer. You can see the counts there. The restricted and prohibited are the invasive species that were detected. Restricted species are species that are going to be somewhat widespread. We see they're common in the state. So it's going to be mystery snails, curly pondweed, rusty crayfish, Eurasian water milfoil. And prohibited species are species that we rarely see. So something like the floating marsh pennywort, yellow flowering, yellow floating heart, things like that. So to break out these numbers for you a little more, I split out what citizens find and then what the professionals find, so the partners and the DNR. So citizens this summer during the pandemic reported monitoring over 500 sites, the DNR partners almost 600. Citizens found about 50 restricted species, no prohibited species. And DNR and partners found just over 100 of restricted and 5 prohibited. Just to highlight some of the species that were detected, we've actually found new populations of zebra mussels in the state, and there were 3 different detections all in northeast Wisconsin by citizens, where citizens found zebra mussels for the first time in these water bodies and reported them to the DNR. And we're working with them to join the Citizen Lake Monitoring Program to see how those populations of zebra mussels change over time. Eurasian water milfoil, there was a new detection during AIS Snapshot Day by a citizen in Oconto County. Water lettuce was found actually by a DNR warden in a private pond, and that DNR warden's working with the landowner to control it. And then I've mentioned the pennywort was found in Horicon. It was actually found by someone who works at Horicon Marsh, and that's where we use the drones to assess the distribution. We found graceful cattail in a private pond in Marinette County. The DNR found it when checking on a different species, and now the local SISMA is working with the landowner. They're sponsoring an early detection response grant for control. Butterbur, which is called a bunch of different things, but the Latin name is Pedicites hybridus. It was reported by citizens in 2 different places in the state, in Dane County and then up in Douglas County. It's got a huge leaf, about 3.5, almost up to 3 feet in leaf diameter. You can see Shelby's hand in that picture. In both cases, we're working with the county and the local SISMAs on control for the species. Common reedgrass, which is Phragmites, was found on a lake shore in Bayfield County. It was reported by the DNR during routine work out there. And they actually have a grant for it to control it. And then Japanese stiltgrass was found for the first time in the state of Wisconsin. It was a citizen report, a knowledgeable citizen, because it's a difficult species to identify if you don't know what you're looking at. But It was actually found on the state forest, and the forester is working to control it. To show you, I guess, how it compares in other years where we've done this monitoring. This is the monitoring efforts and new detections from 2015 to 2020. The y-axis is the number of observations. Let's see, the red line shows us the number of prohibited species. The yellow lines, essentially the middle line, is the restricted species, and the blue line is the number of fieldwork events. So how many times somebody looked. And then I've got the years along the x-axis from 2015 to 2020. And you see it's a little sporadic. The fieldwork events kind of goes up and down. It definitely went down in 2020. But the detections are relatively the same. Let's see, you'll see here in 2018, we have a spike of the restricted species. That was because we had a big effort for roadside monitoring, looking for Phragmites, and we were finding Phragmites. But other than that, it stays fairly consistent, but you do see a drop here in 2020. What I do want to highlight here is with the prohibited species that we never see a big spike with prohibited species because those are not widespread in the state. That's why they're prohibited. And it's fairly consistent over time where we see who's finding those species. It's about half and half with prohibited species, whether that's department staff or citizens that find the prohibited species. So we know that there's a lot of value in having well-trained eyes out on the landscape while they're monitoring, because a lot of those prohibited reports are made not during any specific program. It's just because they've received some training, so they have a certain level of knowledge of what these species look like, and they know they need to report them. So what 2020 taught us is that, we just really need to strategize, like we're all capable of doing this. Citizens conducted about 50% of the monitoring in 2020, which is incredibly impressive, especially during a global pandemic. The citizen programs tend to report new AIS during targeted events and incidental observations. The targeted events was specifically the AIS snapshot day, where we send citizens to certain locations where we believe invasive species might be. And then just because they're getting all this training through these programs, they're reporting things. And we're just asking citizens just attend a training to learn and report new AIS to know what they look like. And when you find invasive species, we have a website. If you go to the DNR website and you just enter invasive species into the search, you'll find this report page. We've got this a link highlighted here to the DNR AIS coordinator. That's who you let know if you find something. This is when you click on the link. This is what it looks like. There's a map of the state of Wisconsin. You can click on the county you're in and know who the person is, or their names, email addresses, and phone numbers are all listed here. And that's my closing slide. It's just a cute picture of kids, because we do a lot of snorkeling. Life is easier when you've got a posse. And that's all I had. I hope we're okay on time.
We're doing great, Maureen. Thank you so much. Perfect. And folks, remember, if you have questions for any of our speakers, type them into the Q&A. And it helps if you say who the question is for. So if it's a question for Maureen or Laura or Allison, you can add that so we'll know who to direct it to at the end. But with that, I think we'll just keep moving, and because we're saving the questions to the end.